What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning into episode 109. This is the third part of a series of podcasts I have done reviewing Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. It's been super influential to me. I've seen a lot of positive change in my life as a result. So I thought I would share with you all my thoughts and opinions about each chapter. If you haven't heard the other episodes, part 1 and part 2, please take a look at episode number 97 and episode number 104, and then come back to this episode where we're going to pick up at rule number 7. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. And I've had conversations both offline and online about pursuing meaning. And the first conversation that comes to mind is the conversation that I had with David Horning a few episodes back. At the end of that episode, we talked about the inevitable aspect of death, that, we're all going to find ourselves one day, somehow, some way, taking our last breath. And to me, I don't believe that when that time comes, I'm going to be stoked about it. I don't believe that I'm going to be happy about it. I for sure can't look at my wife in the eyes and say that I'm happy to be transitioning into something that is completely and utterly unknown. But I'm left to believe that if I live my life in a way that pursues what's meaningful rather than pursuing what makes me happy, I'll eventually, when I get to that point, and hopefully I'll have the ability to think this through when the time comes, and hopefully I'll be able to look at my wife for one last moment and say to myself and to her that it was worth it, and that the time that I spent here on this planet was meaningful, and that I can lay down my shield as a warrior in a way that is complete and full of meaning and full of appreciation. So that's the goal for me, and that's what I think the concepts that Dr. Peterson talks about, and also the concepts in this chapter breaks down. Me applying it to my life has brought a lot of positive benefits to me. And the only way to kind of conceptualize this is to look into the future. And the future is something that is a unique characteristic of humanity. I mean, for all we know, we're the only animal that has a calendar, right? They're like, even a squirrel who kind of collects nuts and puts them away for the winter doesn't really do it in the sense because they know that November's coming up or that December's rolling around. They do it more as an instinct rather than a concept of something that doesn't exist in the present moment, something that's not physically tangible, but as a concept is real and is productive. I know that for myself, attaching my to-do list to my calendar for the next day in advance has been a tremendous productivity hack, if you will, that has enabled me to negotiate with my future self. I put in everything. I put in what I'm going to work on, when I'm going to work on it. And then I also put in when I'm going to check Twitter, when I'm going to have leisure time and recreation. And those two things, work and leisure, I get to negotiate with my future self on how much is enough and how much is too much. And I'm left to believe that ability to do that is only possessed by humans. And it's enabled us to build things and to create things like no other animal. And that brings me to a quote that Dr. Peterson has in the book, where he says that our ancestors acted out a drama, a fiction. They personified the force that governs fate as a spirit that can be bargained with, traded with, as if it were another human being. And the amazing thing is that it worked. And that's what the concept of God is. It's this thing that's governing fate, if you will. It's governing destiny. And we as humans, as a species, we've been able to develop in numerous cultures throughout this world this entity, if you will, that we can look at and say, hey, if I sacrifice this for now, will I get this later? And that's where time comes into play. The idea of time and the idea of sacrifice circles around meaning. And when you think about things like happiness, an example that I can use is going out and having some drinks or having too many drinks, right? It's the idea that I believe Joe Rogan said that getting drunk is stealing happiness from your future self, right? Because, you're having fun drinking with your friends, or for some of you, drinking alone in your bedroom. You're having a fun time now at the expense of 24 hours from now, when you're going to be laying in bed, strung out with a hangover and not really able to be productive or enjoy the future. So when it comes to meaning, there's going to be some, and that's an extreme example that I just laid out. But when it comes to things of the future, when it comes to things of meaning, involved in that is a negotiation, is in bargaining. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to have a little less fun now, so that way I can relax on Saturday or Sunday or Friday or whatever. And that gives you the opportunity to negotiate with something that physically doesn't exist, but is still practical and real in reality, which is the future. So the next part of the book, this chapter, talks about meaning as a higher good. And it starts out with this quote saying that, pay attention, fix what you can. Don't be arrogant in your knowledge. Strive for humility, because totalitarian pride manifests itself in intolerance, oppression, torture, and death. And so we're talking about meaning. We're talking about meaning, making meaningful sacrifice for a higher good, and building that conceptual framework of an entity that you can bargain with falls right in line with that higher good, something that's bigger than yourself, and being able to attach to that. And when you don't have that, when you don't have something that is higher on the hierarchy than you, then your moral landscape is under threat. And it makes me think of tyrants. It makes me think of people that lead with fear of losing control, rather than being a authentic leader who leads through love, leads through compassion and understanding, and trying to work together as a whole to lift all rising ships. And It makes me think of a passage in Sapiens, where it talks about our species as a whole, and how we as a species, we spent the majority of our time on the food chain in the middle of the pack, just collecting scraps of vegetations, nuts, seeds, and small rodents. And then sometime along that path in our evolution, we relatively jumped from the middle of the pack of the food chain to the top of the food chain in a relatively short amount of time. And the idea with that was that we have a fear. We have fear and we have anxiety over our position because it's almost as if we didn't earn it. We kind of feel like a banana republic dictator who at any moment could be dethroned, if you will. And he likens us to other predators when you look at, for example, lions. You look at their food chain, you look at a lion and a gazelle. It doesn't seem like either of them were really anxious unless the gazelle was being chased by a lion. But when you look at the lion has a level of gracefulness to it. It's not worried about losing its job. It's not worried about being demoted. It's not worried about not being able to afford a new lease or whatever. That relationship between the hunter and the hunted, between the lion and the gazelle, has evolved over billions of years. Whereas humans, our ability to skyrocket and to lead the top of the food chain where we're at now, that happened relatively quickly. I believe it happened in a span of 300,000 years. That's when humans at its current form have been in place. But with that being said, with the introduction of agriculture, I believe it goes back 12,000 years. So our ability to manipulate our environment and develop food at scale is relatively recent, and I think that's a interesting concept to look at, because it feels as if and I believe that this is for multiple reasons, but it feels as if we all walk around with an underlying sense of anxiety. And not only is that because of the fact that our intelligence has brought this knowledge of vulnerability, that one day we will die, or the knowledge of good and evil, and that not only are people capable of hurting you, but you're capable of hurting them. All of those things develop the sense of anxiety that sometimes becomes overwhelming. But then also deep in our core, deep in our biological level, we're not used to this. We're not used to being number one on the food chain. And it's almost as if the hardware hasn't caught up to the software. The body hasn't caught up to the mind. And I think that's very interesting to think of as we go through life, pursuing meaning at a higher good, and having this humbleness of understanding, yes, we have this great ability to forecast into the future or reconcile the past. But at the same time, we're at a very fragile place in the grand scheme of things, and that we owe a great debt to not only those that came before us, but those that we're working with now, and building a better future for those to come. And it's much more productive to look at that in a way that is humble, with humility and the effort to cooperate together for that greater good, for the future that conceptually exists but doesn't physically exist. going back to the book, talking more about meaning, Peterson says, to have meaning in your life is better than to have what you want, because you may neither know what you want nor what you truly need. Meaning is something that comes upon you of its own accord. You can set up the preconditions, you can follow meaning when it manifests itself, but you cannot simply produce it as an act of will. Meaning signifies that you are in the right place at the right time, properly balanced between order and chaos, where everything lines up as best it can at the moment. And for me, when I read this, that quote, it makes me think of startups. And when I graduated from college, I had spent the first month that I graduated unemployed. And I had came out of college very Gary V type vibe of, I don't want to go work for the man. I don't want to go have a boss. I want to go start my own business. And I sat there and I tossed around this idea of, well, what am I going to start? And I thought of hundreds and hundreds of different businesses that I could start from my laptop or from the local business incubator, but none of them felt right. None of them felt like they were going to drive immense value. It makes me think of an entrepreneur by the name of Derek Sivers, who I came across on the James Altucher podcast. He had said that he believes that people shouldn't start a business until people ask them to start a business. And that's kind of like the opposite of what we normally think of entrepreneurs and startup cultures around the world. We think of people as being type A and go-getters, and they're going to start this thing and then they're going to attract customers. It's almost as if the concept of Seth Godin, a Hall of Fame marketer, he said that marketing doesn't exist to have customers fix a business problem, but it exists for business problems marketing exists to create business solutions that help consumer problems. So it's like, let's not start a business with the idea of build it and they will come. The same thing goes for meaning. You can't reverse engineer it that way. You can't say, well, this is what I want, and now I'm going to make it meaningful. It makes me think of the book Deep Work by Cal Newport, why skills trump passions in the pursuit of the career that you love. The philosophy in that is that the majority of people, and he cites this time and time again, the people that have the most passion in their careers are those that have first developed rare and valuable skills through hard work. And as a result, they got so good that they then demanded more leverage from employees and from employers and from clients. And that has turned into a career that they're passionate about and a career that they love. And coming out of college, it was kind of like the reverse for me. It was like, follow your passion, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll make all the money in the world. Well, the same goes for meaning. It's not like you can fit the square peg in a round hole. It's kind of look at what you have in front of you and give what is in the present moment your full attention and your full energy and your full commitment with gratitude. And if you do that, there's no way that you cannot generate meaning, right? So this goes for the janitor. This goes for the busboy at the restaurant. This goes for the bus driver. You are making a contribution to something that is much larger than you. And if you do it in a way that you have pride in your contribution, and you look forward to developing how to be more effective at it and more efficient at it and to provide more value. It doesn't matter where you're at on the hierarchy, where you're at on the totem pole. If you approach your life in that manner, there's no way that you cannot drive meaning. So rule number 7, pursue what is meaningful and not expedient. Rule number 8, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. This makes me think of when I was a young boy, I believe around the age of 11 or 12. I had tossed and turned when it came to my faith. I had at that time considered myself to be a Christian, and I thought to myself, well, it's very interesting that I'm a Christian, that I believe in this. And I asked myself, why do I believe in this? Do I believe in this because I believe that this is the truth? Or how much does the fact that my culture plays a role in this belief? Is it a coincidence that I am a Christian when my parents are both Christians, when my grandparents are both Christians, when the local community that I'm a part of is Christian, that the state of Ohio and the country at large is based off of Judeo-Christian values? Is that a coincidence? Or if I were to be born in Saudi Arabia, would I be a Muslim? Or if I was born in India, would I have been a Hindu? Or if I was born in Thailand, would I be a Taoist, right? This was my first introduction, and I didn't know it at the time. It was my first introduction to what is called a meme, and that was, I believe, coined by Richard Dawkins in the book called The Selfish Gene. And what a meme is it's something that's passed down through generations by culture. So genes is information that's encoded and passed down through biology, where memes are passed down through culture. And that is not to take any significance away from culture. Culture is very important, but I think we need to be real about what's cultural and what's practical, what's literal and what's metaphorical. All of those things are important, but I believe that it's more important to be clear about what the source is and where it's coming from, because then we can build off of that. But going back to my story as being a young boy, I had tossed back and forth with this idea, is it true or is it because of my culture? And what I landed on was this dilemma of my children. What was I going to do when I have children? Was I going to allow them to choose their own faith? And would that be responsible of me to do so? As a fundamentalist Christian, the idea of allowing my children to decide their faith would ultimately decide their fate. And that felt risky to me, right? The idea of me being a Christian, a fundamentalist Christian, and looking at my future children saying, hey, you need to choose what you believe. The risk of them choosing a religion that's not mine, and then being cast into hell for all eternity, seemed to be irresponsible parenting. So I came with this dilemma. It's like I cannot not force them to be Christians, but at the same time, if what I believe, if my religion is true, then ultimately that will play out in their lives, and they will come seek the truth. So with that being said, that's what I landed on. I landed on the truth. I landed on not committing myself to a specific ideology, but committing myself to what is true. And I talked briefly on this on a few episodes back. The podcast is titled On Being Religious. And how I define the truth, capital T truth, is that what survives, that what is sustainable, whatever can be done now, today, the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, that's what's true. Because if it's not sustainable and it degenerates, then it degenerates itself. And if you do something that's not good for you and not good for your community and good for others, what happens is everything at the most extreme level, if you take it to its fullest extent, everything gets wiped out, and then nothing exists as a result. So if it's unsustainable, if it doesn't survive, how can it be true? It can't be. So that's how I consider what is to be true, something that's repeatable in a sustainable way, today, tomorrow, and the next day. Going back to the book, a quote here says, "When you explore boldly, when you voluntarily confront the unknown, you gather information and build your renewed self out of that information. That is the conceptual element. However, researchers have recently discovered that new genes in the central nervous system turn themselves on when an organism is placed or places itself in a new situation. These genes code for new proteins. These proteins are the building blocks for new structures in the brain. This means that a lot of you is still nascent in the most physical of senses and will not be called forth by stasis. You have to say something, go somewhere, and do things to get turned on. And if not, you remain incomplete, and life is too hard for anyone incomplete." And that's the truth. Think about any time that you've grown. Have you ever grown from not being in an uncomfortable situation or not being in an unknown situation? And that's kind of what the definition of growth is. It's a micro transformation. It's a micro death, right? It's kind of like a sacrificing of your old self. You used to be one thing and now you're another because you have new information. And that information goes beyond just education. It goes beyond learning things that come out of a textbook. Information is all around us. That's what this universe is. That's what, at a certain extent, that's what perception is. You're perceiving the world in a way where this information is being presented to you, and your consciousness is processing it. That's why it's crucial to pay attention, and that's why it's crucial to be able to observe information rather than attach yourself to information. And that's one of the things that I like to tell people in my family who have a situation where they feel let down by a missed opportunity, or let down by a person in their life that they thought was going to be there for them. Instead of looking at that situation as a concrete reality, something that is inexorably tied to who you are, oh, this is a bad situation. Well, you could just look at at the situation as information. And if you have the ability to perceive anything, that means you have the ability to be alive. And being alive allows you to continue. And to continue allows you to survive. So if you're going to survive, what's the best way for you to move forward? Is it to identify with that information, the negative information that's coming your way? Or is it to look at the information, whether it be for better or worse, and look at it objectively in a way of like, how can we use this information to build and to get better? Are you going to allow the situation or the person to take more than what the situation gives to you? Because I think finding out about a bad situation or finding out about a bad relationship arms you with information on not only who you should be around or what you should be around more, but also what you should be doing less of. And having that information is important. And as a result, a part of you that didn't have that information before dies. And you are born again as a result. And that's what transformation is. And Peterson breaks it out here in the most literal and physical sense, that your physiology actually changes when you go into new situations. And for me personally, I could feel it in my core when this happens to me as an amateur stand-up comedian who tries out new material and, for better or worse, receives information back in a way that requires me to change. Hey, maybe we should keep working on this joke. Maybe we should throw it out completely. Maybe I should quit. Maybe I should keep going. It's all information, and it's all changing me in the most physical and metaphorical sense. Going back to the book, to accept the truth means to sacrifice. And if you have rejected the truth for a long time, then you've run up a dangerously large sacrificial debt. Forest fires burn out dead wood and returned trapped elements to the soil. Sometimes, however, fires are suppressed artificially. That does not stop the dead wood from accumulating. And this makes me think of, I think it's called Planet Earth on Netflix. It's a great documentary. My wife and I watched it, and one of the final scenes came across a forest fire. And we watched it, and we were in disbelief of how much destruction was taking place. But then the next scene was the next season filled with tremendous growth. And the only way to allow this growth was for the forest to burn down completely and to remove the dead wood that was blocking nutrients and sunlight and rain on the forest floor. And according to that documentary, if you put off a forest fire for too long, what happens is an inevitable forest fire burns so intensely that it actually burns the topsoil off, and you can no longer regrow vegetation in that area, and it becomes a desert. This is, and Peterson talks about this is applicable to our own lives. You know, the things that we kind of brush under the rug and we don't tend to now, hoping that, you know, we won't think about it in the future. It just starts building and building and building. And you get to a point where you're so stuck you can't grow, that something happens in your life, whether it's a breakup, whether it's an argument with your boss, whether it's a failed project, a failed business venture. And it feels in the inside that everything is burning up, and it's extremely painful because you realize that there were part of you that should have been burned off a long time ago. And now you have to burn so much of you that it might be all of you. And it's torture. So the idea there is to pursue the truth. And sometimes the truth is you need to get better and you need to change. And you need to make the proper sacrifice to do so. Back to the book. If you portray yourself, if you say untrue things, you act out a lie. You weaken your character. If you have weak character, then adversity will mow you down when it appears, as it will inevitably. You will hide, but there will be no place left to hide. And then you will find yourself doing terrible things. And this is what happens when you avoid the truth. When you avoid the truth, you don't even know who you truly are. When you keep telling lies to yourself and to other people, you have nothing to stand on. And what happens is when you have nothing to stand on and the rug is pulled from underneath your feet, which it inevitably will, whether it's a loss of a loved one or loss of an opportunity, who are you? What is your character? How will you persist? You won't persist because you couldn't even persist in the micro truths that have been made apparent to you throughout your life. And because you weren't able to persist them then, what happens when you have no other choice but to persist? That's why the truth is so important. Back to the book. What saves is the willingness to learn from what you don't know. This is faith in the possibility of human transformation. That is faith in the sacrifice of the current self for the self that could be. The totalitarian denies the necessity for individual to take ultimate responsibility for being. So that's what faith is at its most purest form, right? It's like this potential. Nobody argues with potential. Excuse me. If I came up to you and I said, hey, you're not living up to your potential, you wouldn't argue with me and say, hey, potential doesn't exist because that's in the future and the future isn't here. We all understand that we're capable of more or we're capable of transformation. It's embedded into our psyche and into our body. But what saves is that willingness to learn from what you're uncertain about. And what you're uncertain about is a lot of things. I would say you're probably more uncertain about the universe than what you can be certain about. And acting in a way of, well, this is what I truly believe. This is what I believe to be true. And this is what I believe that aims at a higher good that makes things better. To do that, to live that, to act that out in a way with no certainty that is the case is faith. That's what that is what faith is. When you show up to work with the understanding that you're not going to get paid in the next 8 hours, but you're going to get paid every other Friday, you're acting out a level of faith. And you're also doing that when you pursue truth. When you pursue truth despite of the ugliness that might be presented to you in the short term, to move forward in a way that you feel is best, even though it might be uncomfortable and it might be unsettling, because you have faith that it's the right thing to do and that it's going to make things better in the future. That's what true faith is. It's not this childish belief in magical things that are going to save you from taking responsibility for what you have to do right here and right now. And sometimes that means you have to sacrifice a lot to get more in the future. Moving on back to the book. In the Christian tradition, Christ is identified with the Logos. The Logos is the Word of God. That word transformed chaos into order at the beginning of time. In his human form, Christ sacrificed himself voluntarily to the truth, to the good, to God. In consequence, he died and was reborn. The word that produces order from chaos sacrifices everything, even itself, to God. This single sentence, wise beyond comprehension, sums up Christianity. And this story, the story of Christ, is thousands of years old, and it's stuck around for a reason. And it's because Peterson talks about the individual bearing their cross. What that cross could be a multitude of things. That cross could be, hey, I'm sick, or a family member's sick and I still have to go to work. The cross could be, I'm in tremendous amount of debt and I don't know how to get out of it, but I know that I got to start doing the right things and behaving better and making proper sacrifice. The cross could simply be, I need to get in better shape so that way I can be around and be healthy for those that love me and can use my support. It's all of it. It's, do you truly believe that? Do you truly believe what is good? And are you acting that out in a way that justifies what you say that you believe? And as a result, when you do that, when you say you truly believe something, you're leaving something out as a result of the way you're going to behave. And sometimes it's not pretty, and sometimes it doesn't feel good. But you ultimately have the faith that it is good. Going back to the book. Set your ambitions, even if you are uncertain about what they should be. The better ambitions have to do with the development of character and ability, rather than status and power. Status you can lose. You carry character with you wherever you go, and it allows you to prevail against adversity. This makes me think of a quote from the Stoic philosopher Seneca, a great book called Letters from a Stoic, where he talks about titles, how titles can be put on or taken off as easily as a coat. And we want to update our LinkedIn profile, or we want to update our Twitter bio with CEO, founder, or whatever, senior manager, or VP, or blah blah blah, whatever. The idea of moving up the ladder, moving up the position. Of course, yes, you want to grow and you want to contribute more, and you should receive more compensation for that. But to pursue status for the sake of status is flimsy, because just as fast as you can get that title, it can be taken away. But the characteristics and the skills you learn along the way to get to that point can never be taken away with you if you focus on building character. All right. So that's all I got for this week, folks. Next time, we'll pick up at rule number 9. I appreciate you listening in. If you have thoughts on this book, if you have thoughts on this podcast, I'd love to hear from you. I'm at _Lewis_Leo on Twitter. I hope to hear from you soon, and I hope you have a great week. Thank you again, and much love. Goodbye.